Good afternoon, and welcome to Free Range Humans Radio. Some of the events we'll talk about will be very difficult for people to accept as real, but let me assure you that I know many of the circumstances and other people that mesh into this tale, and there is no question, it is real. David Shurter was forced by his own parents to commit murder at age 10. All through his childhood, he was programmed with drugs, emotional abuse, electroshock, into a life where survival was the priority. The most frightening aspect of all this is that it was condoned and conducted by people within our own government. This was under the umbrella of the MK Ultra program. Now in his mid-40s, David still suffers from post-traumatic stress, but he somehow managed to survive and gain the courage to speak out to try to stop this from happening to other victims. David, I really admire your courage in coming forth and guiding others towards healing. How are you feeling about starting this project?
I'm doing great, Karen. Thank you for having me. And I'm okay. They wanted to raise me as the Antichrist, so it was very important for me to have 666 on my birthday. And so I was born December 6, 1966 at 6:03 in the morning. There is this claim to Satanism and this claim to the occult has run generational in our family.
Your father's background was from a Jewish family?
Yes, and I was just about ready to say that. I believe that the claim to all of this, the stuff that held us involved with it, was my father's Jewish background. And it was the Jewish heritage that I believe has kept us in this generational thing for centuries.
Wow. But your mother was adopted, so do you even know what Jewish connections she might have?
We don't. And I have a brother named David, who I believe, as crazy as this sounds, was my father and mother's first sacrifice. It was the firstborn son. Where most survivors of this don't have validation, their family members stand up against them. I had family members who never let me forget, basically, what was going on.
And then you had a sister who was speaking out, and then you feel like there was some interference with that that caused her death?
Well, my sister Cindy was telling people that her husband and her oldest daughter were going to murder her. And she had health problems. She was seeing doctors, and she actually told the doctors and nurses that her husband and daughter were going to murder her. Adult Protective Services got involved, and within a week, my sister ended up dead. And she was alone with my brother-in-law and my niece. I personally believe that it was right around the time that my father died. Cindy and I were very close, and they were afraid that she was going to tell me details about what had gone on in the past. And I think that's the reason why she was murdered.
Well, you also had a brother, Stephen, is that correct? And then he really broke free of the activities, did he?
No, he never broke free. He was a predator all of his life. He died in Ocean City, Maryland. And 2 years after he died, a man by the name of Larry King, not the same Larry King who was involved in the Omaha Franklin fiasco, but a different Larry King, 2 years later got busted with satanic child porn. And I believe that collection of satanic ritual child porn was my brother's originally.
Wow.
And
do you believe that may have been the second photographer that Rusty Nelson referred to in the Franklin?
Yes.
That they never identified?
Yes. Rusty Nelson and my brother Stephen looked very similar. Both scraggly hair, ratty beards, kind of unkept. And my brother Stephen looked a lot like Rusty. Since they were so much older, I just know that my brother was involved he was a photographer in the service, came back with pictures of dead people in graves, And I believe they were trophy pictures of people that he had either murdered or been involved with.
You even had some experiences where you were buried alive with some corpses, I guess. Is that true?
Yes. I remember being buried once, and they left me in the ground. It seems like forever. It was probably just a few hours, but it seems like a lifetime.
Oh, man.
I was left in that grave with that corpse for hours. And most people don't, when they go to funerals, they don't actually smell the corpse. But when you're stuck in a casket with a corpse, all you can smell is death. Not only was I buried alive, but I've also seen other children buried alive.
And now the other children you saw may have not been unburied, right?
They may have not been unburied. My sister told me that it was a 50-50 shot. Some of them were left in graves with other people. Some of them were dug up. And a lot of it was just really a mind, a play with the mind, that she would think that her friends were murdered and then they'd show up a week later. And so you never knew who was really alive or who really was dead when they did stuff like that.
Did you have any idea whether you would be, you had a better than 50-50 shot of coming out of that alive?
When I was buried, I thought that was it. I thought that it was the end of my life. I thought it was the end of my life many times growing up. That's the reason why I have post-traumatic stress disorder, because the fight or flight and the live or die type mentality was really bred hard into the training that I went through. I mean, they rarely ever did anything to you without pumping you full of drugs first. And then sometimes afterwards you got electroshock therapy, just a couple jolts, enough to actually you forget what was going on.
What did they use for that? A cattle prod or like a tase? Did they have tasers back then?
They had what I remember is being connected and having electrode things stuck on my temples and getting electricity through it. But they used a lot of electricity. They used, somewhat like cattle prods, electricity was a big thing for them to use. My sister was the one who told me that they like to bring people to the edge of death and then bring them back, and then take them to the edge of death again and then bring them back.
Is that mostly done by Colonel Michael Aquino?
All of my stuff. Colonel Michael Aquino was my main handler. He was stationed, from what I understand, he was stationed in St. Louis at the time, but of course St. Louis is only an hour plane ride from Omaha to St. Louis. And a lot of this stuff, a lot of my growing up, I discredited the satanic aspect and the ritual aspect and thought it was all governmental experimentation, because a lot of my stuff happened at Offutt Air Force Base. To this day, I still can't step on base. I can't go anywhere near that base. And so Colonel Aquino was my main handler. He was involved with almost all the abuse that I went through.
And just for the people listening who may be not familiar with who Colonel Michael Aquino was, he actually was in the Army, and he was the man responsible for gaining recognition and acceptance of Satanism as an acceptable religious choice for the military. You can just be thankful to that guy today.
Yeah. I'm thankful.
Oh, yeah. And he was involved in the Presidio out in San Francisco, was he not?
Yes, he was involved with the Presidio. A lot of people remember, because back in the 80s and 90s, we had a big influx of people claiming that their children were being ritually and sexually abused in daycares. And one of the most notable ones that people have heard about is McMart Preschool. And the preschool in the Presidio was right in San Francisco. That was right in San Francisco.
Weren't there very young children coming home with venereal diseases and that sort of thing from that preschool?
Yes, from all of the preschools, actually. People talk about McMartin like it was just one preschool, but what most people don't realize is that there was a little over half a dozen preschools in the area that were saying the same thing. And what was happening was that the children were coming home and relating stories about murdering animals, having animals murdered in front of them, being sexually abused, and they had something called the False Memory Foundation, which came forward, which was designed by a family of accused pedophiles, and that's who set up the False Memory Foundation. And they all came through and said, these are all false memories. Well, I'm not quite sure how they are false memories when your child's coming home with gonorrhea and STD in their anuses, which is where I think the name that you've dubbed them with is more appropriate. What is that? I call them the False Memory Pedophile Protection Squad. They're designed to actually quiet and silence survivors and protect pedophiles. And as far as I'm concerned, that's all the False Memory Foundation does, is silence the victims and promote the pedophiles.
David, are you still there?
I am here. I got disconnected, but I called right back.
Okay. I'd like to go back to your background and see if we can, if there's anything we left out about your family. They were also indoctrinated very much into this. I even hate to call it satanic ritual abuse because I think it's government mind control abuse, personally.
And I am really uncomfortable. I choose usually not to talk about satanic ritual abuse. It does have the satanic elements, but really when this comes down to it, for me, for the longest time, I believed that this was all government mind control. It was all CIA, MK Ultra mind control stuff. And I had a hard time distinguishing between the MK Ultra experiments and the Satanism. I kind of blended them all together because you can't have one without the other. Generally, the MK Ultra stuff comes in, and they were trying to design super soldiers. John DeCamp, who was an investigator into this Franklin thing a long time ago, called it psychic warriors, and I think that is probably the best name for it.
I think in a way they succeeded because anyone who survived, which I don't know what the percentage is, actually have some pretty intensely strong skills against emotional abuse and mental abuse. And I consider you a very strong person in that regard. Because you actually, two questions. I wanted to ask you if you have any concept of how many people you've met that were indoctrinated and suffered in this programming who were related to government programming.
I have met personally, I have spoken at national conferences in America, in the country, and I have personally met probably hundreds of people who have the same kind of tales that I have to say, and they all equate what they went through with the MK Ultra government mind control.
Okay, you people listen to hear this. This is real, and this is hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of people that have been severely abused and murdered by elements within our own government. Anybody who thinks that we're serving a beneficial purpose by serving our government and going to wars and any of this, think twice, okay, about what you are serving.
Well, and there's a real focus of evil in our government. We always want to look at, as Americans, that we're the good guys.
sorry to disillusion anybody.
Disillusion, yeah. Most survivors just want to forget. They thank God that they survived, and they want to go on with their lives, and they want to forget what happened to us as kids.
Because they think they're isolated. They think they're alone.
Yeah. And that's what social media, that's why I've struggled so hard. I have a website. It's important for us to come forward with our stories, because the one thing that most people, when people listen to me, they think, oh, well, that's great. It happened in your childhood. But it's still happening now.
Can you tell us about what you were taught about you, focusing on you being the Antichrist?
Well, we had a lot of my childhood being focused on the Antichrist. I was taught how to murder kids.
By what method?
Generally through very up close and personal daggers, stabbing people, stabbing children, cutting pieces of kids apart.
How many people?
Cannibalism. Oh, I couldn't tell you. You know, I actually asked my sister Kathy if she could remember how many kids died in her childhood, how many murders she was involved with. And she couldn't tell me. Because you would have one night, you would have what they were called was happenings. Because you would start off with a picnic, and it would be great. You know, you'd go to a picnic, and you'd eat out, and you'd swim and play and all of that. But as it got darker and everyone got more wasted, because people are thinking, oh, well, these are all, you know, a lot of times the people who are involved with all of this stuff were alcoholic drug users as well. And I think that the people had to anesthetize themselves, because you would have one night, I mean, there were times where we would kill 3 kids in a night. And I mean, slicing and dicing and then drinking their blood. They have a big thing to where if you torture and terrorize a person long enough, what ends up happening is that there's so many endorphins that flood the blood that the blood acts like an aphrodisiac. And so there was a lot of blood sacrifice. There was a lot of cannibalism. There was a lot of bestiality. Anything that you could basically think of that was humiliating, traumatizing to a child, that's what they did.
But how many people would actually participate in, like in one murder, stabbing? Would it be just you, or would it be a group of people, or was somebody holding your hand with a dagger in it? Or how many people participated in that act?
Usually you had a coven. You had a coven of people, which generally ran 12 people. My father was a high priest. He wore a red robe, which symbolized blood sacrifice. And there weren't a lot of robes. Well, what ends up happening is that you get done with blood sacrifice, you get done drinking the blood, and then everyone would have sex. And so you knew that after the kid got killed and murdered that you were going to be raped. Because I was my father's son and I was being trained to be the Antichrist, I was involved and pretty much right up there with all of the murders. If I didn't have to drive a knife into the child myself, I had to at least watch and act like I enjoyed it. That was the biggest thing, is that tears were not, you couldn't have any emotions during the sacrifices. Emotions were ferociously dealt with. And so...
Wow. How could you not be emotional?
That's why people get DID. Because what ends up happening is that you dissociate. Because emotions mean that you're actually going to get hurt. And back then, as a child, you never knew if you were going to be next. You never, and they, would do things like disembowel kids. And that sounds terrible, but what's terrible is that disembowelment doesn't kill a person right away. And so, here you have their intestines out and all of that, and they're screaming and in pain and all of that. And you just have to endure it. You just have to deal with it. Whereas I went through the MK Ultra training. That was the difference between my brothers and sisters and I. So if they don't remember anything at Offutt Air Force Base, which is in Bellevue, it's right out. It's a suburb of Omaha. Offutt Air Force Base it was well known to be involved with this.
Well, and I hate to do this, but it is also I just happen to know it's also the secret world headquarters for the global grid. Yeah.
Anytime that we have a problem, like 9/11, when we had 9/11, George Bush was flown to Offutt Air Force Base.
Yeah.
He comes to Omaha because there are, I think that there's 2 miles of underground bunkers underneath it. And so our government has really done a job trying to keep all of this hidden and quiet.
What do you remember as far as technology, or what can you walk us through the halls of Offutt Air Force Base, the halls that you walked?
Well, a lot of when I went into Offutt Air Force Base, generally when I was in there, I was drugged. That was a big thing with the programming, was being drugged, and with electroshock therapy. But in Offutt Air Force Base, I remember what I call a spinning project, where they strapped me into a machine. You've seen them on television, like what they do to astronauts. They spin them around, high-velocity spins.
To test the centrifugal force before you black out.
Right. And I went through a lot of that as a child, not as an adult, but as a child. It is this whole reason why the spinning program and what I went through and some of that was the whole reason why I can't ride. I can't even swing on a swing nowadays. Sitting on a swing and going back and forth or spinning around at all makes me sick immediately and starts to make me dissociate. Because even though I don't have DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, where the person breaks apart into separate personalities, I do have dissociative tendencies where I somewhat black out, kind of. I don't often lose time, but I get stressed out and I am unable to control myself. I also had a lot of things done with my mouth. It's the one reason why when I go to the dentist, I have to be so drugged out that I'm almost unaware of anything.
Well, what were they doing with your mouth?
Oh, they had this contraption that they would strap in. It was a metal piece that they would put in your mouth that would keep your mouth open. And they could force you to eat stuff like feces, all kinds of stuff. Sleep deprivation was a big thing, not allowing me to sleep for long periods of time. There is a great website out there. Lynn Shermer is a survivor, and she has drawn out a lot of the contraptions that were used. A lot of things were inserted into the head of my penis. Electricity was inserted into the head of my penis. Every nasty thing you can think of. I know people who were raped by cattle prods, stuck up their bum with electricity in it. I personally don't remember anything like that, but it's hard to, as an adult, it's hard to really put it all together and put it in a way that actually is congruent so that you can explain it to people. Because do you have to relive the emotions of it to go through it? Or can you... Right now I'm dissociated, kind of just having this conversation. It's okay for me to talk. The emotions will probably come a little bit later. And that's why I'm very careful a lot of times of who I talk to this about, because the emotions can come back. You can have emotions. You can have body memories. For the longest time, I had problems with my genitals hurting constantly at the tip. And nothing was wrong. I would go to the doctor. Nothing was wrong. And then through therapy, that was when I started to remember, well, wait a minute. They put things up I think it's called the urethra. And that's the reason why I had the problems. And then when I remembered what had happened, the body memories went away, and I haven't had problems with it since.
there is such a thing as cellular level memory in your body, and
yes, there is.
yeah, and that can really block your body. So hopefully this will, help that. But when you were being taught to be the Antichrist, what was the significance of the pentagram?
I was always in the middle of the pentagram. I was regarded as a host. I was being raised to believe that something was going to inhabit me when I was an adult. It was not me, but a different entity. And I write about it in my book because, lo and behold, at 40 years old, I went through a phase where I ended up having what was called a shamanic extractment done. Now, at the time, I thought I was either losing it, losing my mind, or my brain was starting to repair itself by living over something that I believed was my destiny at the beginning. But basically what they did was that they would put me in the middle. Now, my sisters and brother were all on the outside of the circle. And I show pictures in my book of Hummel Park where they have a star, an inverted star, inlaid into the stonework of the pavilion where we did most of the sacrifices at Hummel Park.
Well, there, 30-some years later, right?
Yeah, it's still there. It's still there.
That takes some serious stonework to come up with a 5-pointed star out of stone and inlay it in the ground. That's so intentional. And I wanted to ask, because there's fireplaces also on either end of that. Is that the pavilion? And then they've bricked up the fireplaces so they can no longer be used. Right.
At the time, I was told that those fireplaces, they were considered the fires of hell.
And you believe it as a kid.
Oh, and I believed it. I as a kid, I believed. The whole thing about it is, as a kid, you can convince a kid almost anything. And I believed all of it. I believed that I was actually going to be the Antichrist up until about the age of 27 is when it started to dissipate. And the only reason why it started to dissipate is because I had a friend of mine look at me. I told her that I thought I was going to be the Antichrist. And she looked at me and said, "What are you going to do? Insult people's clothing choices? Yeah, you're not going to be much of an Antichrist."
Did they ever define for you what they meant when they told you you were going to be the Antichrist? Did they get specific about what that meant?
To me, it was supposed to be something to actually be proud of and be excited about. To me, I was told that I would be able to do whatever I wanted. It would, allow me to have riches. Picture everything that Satan would say to you and try and ply you with to get you to turn over. And that's what they did. And it was supposed to be this great thing, this wonderful thing. I was going to take over power and live forever. And I, as a child, fought against it. I think that my love for God really did save me. And I went through a huge period of years and years and years of my adult life trying to find any way out of being the whole Antichrist thing because I loved God.
So you felt chosen, like an evil version of Neo in the Matrix, kind of.
Right.
And that would be confirmed by other adults around you treating you as if that were true.
People ask me all the time how I survived the chaos and survived what happened as a child. And I tell people all the time that what saved me was God. God had a hand in my life from the very beginning. I'm not Christian per se, but I do love God. And I've read the Bible over and over and over. I found the Bible to give me quite a bit of comfort as a kid. I'm glad that we're getting this out, not because, it's graphic and, it's going to get people all, but because it's important for people to realize who have experienced this that you're not alone. You're not alone. Other people have gone through it. They have survived. We're all starting to come together as groups now. Social media has allowed us to actually group together. I think that a lot of people who go through this are trapped in their own past and their own memories of the past and the trauma that went through. And the only way to get rid of the trauma is through talking about it, through therapy. I've had over a decade of therapy, which now enables me to be able to talk to Karen, such as yourself, because one of the main tools of the perpetrators in my life was isolation.
So I do want to devote this 30 minutes to that pivotal event in your life when you were 10 years old. And first of all, why don't you tell us about the girl that disappeared?
The girl that disappeared, we were in Omaha, Nebraska. She was a playmate of mine. She lived a couple blocks down the street. And she was a friend of mine. We were over in North Omaha. Well, when we moved to Fremont.
How far away was Fremont?
About 35 minutes from Omaha. And so when we were there, what ended up happening was that the girl's father showed up at our house and knew that we were playmates and he was looking for his daughter. And so they decided to kill him. Panicking makes you do strange things. What ended up happening is that he was drugged. We tied him up downstairs. I have a video out that people can see the house where this happened. It's called "You Need to Know" or "I Need Help in Solving a Murder," and that's on YouTube. But he was all drugged out. Later that night, my dad doused him with charcoal fluid or something flammable. It was in a can, flammable. And my stepmother lit a match, handed it to me, and I was forced to throw a match on him and lit him on fire, which he woke out of his drug stupor and started screaming. And my dad then took a shovel and shoved it into his stomach.
The whole book for me to deal with was that your father would consider shoving a blunt instrument like a shovel in the guy's stomach to kill him. What a hideous thing to do.
My dad was a piece of work, but the difference between all of the rest of the murders and all of the horrendous stuff I'd gone through and what happened then was that it was not part of my MK Ultra programming. I was not drugged. I was stone cold sober, and it threw me into a psychotic break.
Yeah,
and,
I think
that was the first time I ever watched someone burn, and it was absolutely horrendous. It was horrible. We moved out of the house right after that and moved to Grettinger, Iowa, which was 3.5 hours north of Omaha. And so we basically hid out in a town of 900.
Wait, you said that he was buried 2 days later.
He was up in our, around our cabin. We had a cabin at Silver Lake, Minnesota. I knew that we were taking him up there. I didn't see him actually get buried, but I knew that he was in the trunk, and we were driving up to get rid of the body. I was never allowed to go into the burial area, probably because my father was afraid that I would lead people to that area and narc him out. When I was 40 and my dad died and my sister was murdered, I started putting my past together, and the first thing I did was went to the police and have been trying to get an investigation and got to the police, and that's what they were afraid of. Lighting the guy on fire was to ensure my silence, because basically what I was told was, you did this, you did it, you lit him on fire, so if you tell, you're going to be in trouble. As an adult, it kind of backfired because I held myself responsible. And so I've gone to the police, I've gone to the mayor's office, I have a judge that I've been faxing about all of this stuff. I have been trying to get this looked at for now about 7 years.
And this was, you began your formal request for investigation after your father's death, right? Because of a confession he tried to make?
My father told me that he had committed crimes against children and that he had skeletons in his closet, which I have come to think he was talking literally and not figuratively, because he rebuilt his entire closet along with a pedestal bed. I believe that my parents were involved with child abductions such as Johnny Gosch, Jacob Wetterling, Ricky Chaddick. There are 4 murdered children that happened at the same time that I was forced to light the guy on fire in Michigan. I believe my parents could have been involved with that. That's called the Oakland child killings. It happened in a county called Oakland in Michigan. My father was from Michigan, and my father was also a pilot.
So he could get assistance in a short time to commit these murders and then get back home for dinner. Right. Jump in his plane, and I know that they were using the plane for nefarious reasons, because at one point in time, I saw a child thrown out of the plane. And it was, again, to keep me quiet. And the child was still alive?
Yes.
And
thrown out of the plane without a parachute.
Yeah, and that would give you nightmares. That would give anybody nightmares.
See, that's the thing about it is that that's why, people say, the stuff was repressed, and they say that their memories were repressed. Well, my memories were never repressed. They just played out in my sleep, 24/7.
What happened when your father was trying to make his confession? Was he able to succeed in basically confessing everything to those around him, or what?
My stepmother and my brother went out of their way to make sure that everybody thought he was crazy, and they blamed it on the medication because he was dying of prostate cancer. And so they were telling everybody that my father was crazy. The end of his life, he was weak. And so my stepmother was taking the phone off the hook downstairs so he couldn't get on the phone. The reason why my father came clean is because I wrote him a letter years before telling him, I know you believe in God, Dad. I know you believe in hell. Do you really think you're not going to go to hell for the things you've done? You need to come clean and tell people so that you can save your own soul. And that's why my father started to come clean. Now, I have talked to Noreen Gosch, who is Johnny Gosch's mother. Johnny Gosch is a famous abducted child. And she told me herself that she got a phone call from my father, but she just didn't understand what he was saying until she got together with me and heard what I had to say. But my brother, Stephen, was identified by 5 different people going to a private talk by Noreen Gosch down, I believe it was in Tampa, Florida. They don't know how he found out about the talk or anything like that, but he showed up and said things like, I wonder if Johnny Gosch is going to show up tonight, and said all of this inappropriate stuff. And then when Noreen Gosch went to go confront him, he went to his van and almost tried to run her down in the parking lot.
Do you think he knew and had personal contact with Johnny Gosch?
Yes, I believe my family was very involved with the abduction with Johnny Gosch. The 3 vehicles that have been talked about in a lot of these abductions: a blue utility truck, a green station wagon with wood paneling, and a white Oldsmobile. These 3 vehicles are common with a lot of the abductions that happened around here, and my family owned all 3. The story of Franklin has become such a distraction, and Johnny Gosch, my contention is, my problem with it is, I don't understand how an abduction that happened in West Des Moines became synonymous with everything that was going on in Omaha, Nebraska at the time.
It was that Paul Benassi was involved in the abduction, and that's why they connected it. But weren't your siblings also involved in luring children into this nightmare?
Oh, yes, they were. My sister will tell about going down to the old market and luring people, and it's in Omaha, Nebraska.
And that's where they took the kids from Boys Town on their outing.
Yeah, Boys Town kids went on outings down at the old market. And when I was a kid, my father refused to take me down to the old market because he kept telling me that kids were abducted and, disappeared down at the old market. I feel that it is important to expose what happened here and to talk about what happened here because it hasn't stopped. It's repeating itself over and over and over. Now, granted, my father is dead, and he was a child abductor, and people would say, why would it matter? Well, my father didn't work alone. And the problems that I've had, such as having my booksellers being met at 3 o'clock in the morning by someone who's threatening their house and their livelihood and their life, my stepmother is not behind all of that. It can't be behind all of it. It has to be a much bigger picture.
What do you think that your parents gained from being involved in this covert government program that we believe is directly connected to the MK Ultra, et cetera? What did your parents benefit?
Money, protection, power, the 3 Ps.
What about prestige? Did your parents get more prestige in the community from this?
Well, my sister, Chris, who is my stepmother's daughter, and my father and stepmother's daughter, married into the Blumkin family. The Blumkin family are very connected to Warren Buffett because they own a majority stock of Nebraska Furniture Mart, which is a high-end furniture place, here in Omaha, Nebraska. And so they run in circles. My grandfather, or not my grandfather, but my Uncle Walt and my Aunt Sandy, who lived in West Des Moines, which is the reason why I talked about yesterday abductions that were occurring. And the reason why I believe that we were involved in those abductions is because we had family members in every one of those places. In Omaha, we had the Ricky Chaddick case, and my grandparents and my Uncle Walt, or my Uncle Jack, lived in Omaha, so we had a high family that was here. Walt Davis and Sandy Davis are my aunt and uncle. My Aunt Sandy is my father's sister. They lived in West Des Moines.
Okay, so you felt that those abductions occurred where your family was located. What about the power? Well, I guess that addresses the power of the 3 Ps also. And what about protection?
Well, right now, my stepmother hasn't had to face anything. Even with all of the allegations of everything that I've alleged happened, she hasn't had to face any police inquiry whatsoever. The biggest person that I was involved with as a young adult into my adulthood was Alan Baer, B-A-E-R. Alan Baer was known, he came from a wealthy family himself, but he also married Marcia Brandeis. Brandeis was a department store here, and there was a vast fortune connected with it. And so when he married Marcia, they combined assets, and he took over such things as the Brandeis department store, the Lancers hockey team. And he was heavily involved with Larry King, who was the head of the Franklin Credit Union when it crashed, and the federal government found that $40 million was built out of it. Peter Citron actually happened to be my mother's best friend. They worked together at the Sun-Times, or the Sun newspaper, and then when the Sun newspaper went belly up, they transferred over, and Peter Citron became a columnist for the Omaha World Herald, and my mother became a copy editor.
Well, tell me about the house that was owned consecutively by both Alan Baer and the Brandeis family, right?
Yes. In my book, I talk about a funeral home because at the time when I wrote about it, I believed it was on the outskirts of town, which when I was a child, it was on the outskirts of town. 72nd Street was basically the edge of town, and everything else out west was just starting to develop. And I talk about games of hide and seek where you went from pitch black to so bright that you were blinded and couldn't see. and children were being murdered while they played hide and seek, because the whole rule of the game is if you were found, you were murdered. And so, of course, you hid, hoping that you would save your life. And
now, yesterday you talked about there were children that were buried alive in graves, including yourself. Right. Was this sometimes a similar thing where they were just basically traumatizing children with the threat of death, or were the children actually murdered?
Oh, the children were murdered, and you were threatened by the threat of death. Because what would happen is that they would ultimately, my sister and I have talked about it, and whenever they did their little games, they always knew who they were. They always knew who they were going to murder. They always knew. As a child, I didn't know who they were going to murder. But looking back as an adult, I realized that they always did. And so you would be hiding in this house for your life, and they would be catching people and torturing kids, and you could hear the kids screaming. Now, people would say, in a neighborhood, a residential neighborhood, wouldn't you hear? No, you wouldn't, because the house that this was all happening in was Alan Baer's old house. And so there's all kinds of passageways. It's designed to be, there's all kinds of secret passageways and areas that don't make sense and walls that don't make sense and all of that. And it is a very prestigious neighborhood full of huge old mansions with a lot of property around them.
So you thought that this was a funeral parlor. What made you think that at the time?
Because of the activities that were going on at Forest Lawn Cemetery that I did remember for a fact. There is a chapel that was built in Forest Lawn Cemetery by the Freemasons. And I distinctly remember child sacrifices happening in that chapel. I remember having to play hide and seek and being in the crematorium downstairs because the crematorium is below the chapel. And a tunnel leading out to the woods, which was a graveyard, which it all exists.
People have said that there couldn't possibly be as many murders of children and no bodies found. But there have been cases reported where children were buried in coffins along with other corpses that they were just hidden underneath so that there were burials that no one knew about children, and that's one of the ways they would get rid of the evidence. Do you know other ways?
The crematorium was used highly, and so they would just be cremated, and the ashes would be put into the graves with other people. A lot of the children found their resting spot in a place. My mother always called it Babyland. I went to Forest Lawn. I've only been there twice.
This is Forest Lawn in Omaha, Nebraska, as opposed to any other Forest Lawn.
Right, Forest Lawn Cemetery in Omaha, Nebraska.
And where did these children come from in the first place?
Omaha was a hub. A lot of kids disappeared traveling by Greyhound. You also had boys that were being abducted and used and sold out at Boys Town. And Boys Town was heavily involved with what was going on with the Franklin Credit Union and all of that. I'll just give you a few names that were involved so that people can see who, the elite that were involved. Willie Thiessen, who built Godfathers.
Isn't there a direct connection between Willie Thiessen and the black candidate for president recently who took over the Godfather?
What was his name?
But there is evidence that's come out fairly recently about a child kidnapping ring in, I believe it was Cambodia, where there were several children that were trafficked from there directly to Boys Town in Omaha, Nebraska, and this is back in, I believe, the 70s. So there's other connections to that hub of Omaha. And the E. John Brandeis fortune, he had direct connections with Boys Town in helping even establish it, right?
Yep, the Brandeis house, because it's for sale right now.
This is the same house that you were just talking about as the Baer house, right?
Right. It's the exact same house. The Bear family is very proud because they have handwritten letters from the Father Flanagan because they spent so much money on helping build Boys Town. And so it's yet another example of
the connection,
how it's all connected. It's all connected, and the money is all there.
But the John Brandeis owned a very large ranch, I believe, in California, which just happened to be adjacent to, connected to the Spahn Ranch, which is where the Charles Manson family resided. And
I believe that Charlie Manson is an MK Ultra survivor. A lot of the rants that he talks about that people I think are crazy are the very things that I was taught when I was a kid. And so,
and give examples of what your program.
The fact that we would have a race war. When I was to take power, there was supposed to be a race war. Everyone was supposed to beat each other's throats, and that's what he wanted to incite. He talks about Satanism and the hedonism of society.
And you were going to take power as the Antichrist, and so was Charlie. Right.
They trained a lot of boys. From what I can see, they trained a lot of us to believe that we were going to be the Antichrist. And so it wasn't just my own personal experiences.
Now, Charlie Manson, as I understand, was in the prison system from a young age for most of his life, and will spend the rest of his life there. But so they had access to him for programming. Did they ever try to get you into the prison system?
They tried. My programming for my father was that I was supposed to commit suicide or I was going to end up in jail. But, the saving grace, there's two things that saved me. One, my faith in God. And the other thing is having PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. I laugh at people and I tell people, I'm stressed out as it is. Could you imagine me as a criminal and have to worry about the police breaking into my door every minute? It's funny how certain things, the man that we talked about yesterday that I was forced to light on fire, and how it was a pivotal moment in my life where it actually saved me, a huge traumatic event, but it broke the programming that I was under. And there is a distinct possibility that had they kept going on with my programming, I could have turned out to be a completely different person.
Be more like Charlie Manson, right?
Right.
Yeah. What were most of the victims? I've heard you talk mostly about the children being mostly white and mostly male. Was that the experience, or were there also females in younger and older ages?
There were females involved in the abuse. There were adults that were involved in murder, or in being murdered. There were adults. There were also all the rituals that we went through, and most of the stuff were generally, always, prepubescent young boys. You
did. You were constantly badgered to do away with yourself, right?
Yes. When I was 13, right after I had just turned 13, I tried to commit suicide, thinking that I was the Antichrist. In fact, I tried repeatedly to commit suicide, and failed miserably each time. Which the thing about it is that they were all lame attempts because I really did not want to die.
One time you actually did. I believe you took some pills and you ended up in the hospital, right?
Right.
And
I ended up in the hospital for Cherokee, Iowa, and I was there for 5 months.
Your father showed up?
Well, he showed up 4 days later. They had social workers taking me to the hospital. But he showed up 4 days later, and the first thing he said to me when he got me alone was, "We live right by a railroad track. Why didn't you just jump in front of a train?" Which, of course, made me feel bad. Yeah, you gotta love him. It was the best time because I was not being abused. And so that was the best thing about it, was just that I experienced life without abuse for 5 months.
Oh, while you were in the hospital.
Right.
How many abductions and murders do you believe your father was involved with?
Countless. He was a pilot in a plane. Like I said, we had family up in Minnesota when Jacob Wetterling disappeared. We had, and the abduction pictures for the abductor for Jacob Wetterling looks exactly like my dad. I have those posted on my blog. And then we also have Johnny Gosh and the 2 other children that were abducted, the 2 other boys that were abducted in West Des Moines, Iowa, Eugene Martin, and I'm drawing a blank on the 3rd one. But we had family there, the Ricky Chaddick case down here.
And then how about up in Michigan?
Up in Michigan, there were, the year that in 76 and 77, there were some ritual murders of 4 children up there. And I believe that my father was involved with it because I think that what they were afraid that things were going to explode in Omaha. And they were trying to deflect the claims of ritual abuse and put it in a different state, which is the reason why Michigan has the case called the Oklahoma child killing case.
Oakland,
Michigan.
And your father flew, but did he have his own plane, or did he ever use government military planes?
I can't answer that. I think that he had his own plane, and the reason why is because my stepmother I would never have remembered the plane. I had blanked the plane out and the experiences that I'd had on the plane because they were always so bad. And
Can you go back into? No, we touched on that yesterday, but was there more detail about what happened on the plane?
Well, I mean, the plane always meant someone was going to get hurt, someone was going to be abducted. You know, the plane was, I know that he was flying a small private plane, but I also know that there were bigger planes as well. And my father could not have been the only pilot involved. But I had completely spaced off that my father was a pilot. But my stepmother brought it up at his funeral because she danced around like Rumpelstiltskin thinking that she had accomplished all of this and nobody could bust her out for it. And in the process, she reminded me of a lot of stuff that I had forgotten.
Did he ever fly in or out of Offutt Air Force Base?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was the Offutt Air Force Base that we were flying in and out of. It wasn't Epley Airfield. Epley Airfield is, and the thing about it is that, people say, well, go get logs and stuff like that. Well, we're talking, when I was a kid, 60s and 70s, and getting the information that far back is virtually impossible. Epley is the airfield. It's the public airfield that's in town. That's where everyone flies in and out of, usually for Omaha.
Can you spell that?
Eppley, Epley.
Okay.
Most of the plane flights that I remember were out of Offutt Air Force Base. And I think the reason why is because there was no record being kept, There were drugs being flown. That's why I say Willie Thiessen, who built Godfathers, he was involved with what was going on here in Omaha. P.J. Morgan, a real estate tycoon, he was heavily involved. One of the people that just makes people's minds spin is Warren Buffett, involved in the cult, in what was going on in Omaha, involved in all of it. And that's why I tell people, if you want to figure out who was really involved in the Franklin fiasco and the Franklin in Omaha, what you have to do is you have to track down the money. Who became inordinately rich at a time that the rest of the country lost their shirts?
I wanted to say that the Franklin Credit Union was founded in the name of Warren Buffett's wife, Susan. Were you aware of that?
I was not aware of that.
Yeah.
That's not coincidental, if you ask me.
The real perpetrators behind it all have gotten off scot-free. And who would you say is up at the top of that, behind it all?
Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha. You know, there's no way he didn't know and wasn't involved.
And
George Bush Sr. George Bush Sr. was heavily involved. Not only in the goings-on of the drugs with the Iran-Contra scandal, but in the whole mind control with the MKUltra. You have to remember that George Bush Sr. was head of the CIA for a long time. The interesting thing about Larry King, with everything that was going on, is that he went to jail for bilking the Federal Credit Union out of $40 million, but didn't face one crime against children.
Well, of course, we know that there were over 80 children that were interviewed by Gary Caradori, and then those videotapes ended up, with the help of Mr. Ted Gunderson, in the hands of the private Nebraska Leadership Conference where they disappeared. I just want to get that on the record because I don't think nobody knows about that. But then the other evidence that Rusty Nelson provided to Gary Caradori on his plane when his plane was exploded over Aurora, Illinois, which is where the chief of police, Robert Wadman, was, and arrived on the scene to confiscate the pictures that never saw the light of day. So there's been a lot of stifling of evidence and shutting people up. And what happened to you back in, I'm thinking this is maybe 5 years ago, when you were targeted by directed energy?
I was a victim of these directed energy weapons.
Were you starting to speak out at that time is why you were targeted?
The very first time that I got targeted, it was because I was involved with this investigation, and I was starting to speak out because I had issues with the investigation itself and what was being left out of the investigation. And I suddenly found myself inundated with the sound in my house that was only in my house. I thought it was that I had tinnitus, which is a ringing in the ears, but it was only in my house. That was the only place I could hear it.
You'd already been living in this house for some time, so
for quite some time, for years.
Okay.
Never had a problem before.
And no one else could hear the sound?
No. But it was really loud at night, and it kept me from sleeping for 2.5 weeks.
That will make anyone have a psychotic break if they can't, if their brain can't sleep for 2 weeks.
I had sent my manuscript for Rabbit Hole over the web to be published, and the very next day at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I heard and felt the weaponry turn back on. And it lasted a week and a half. I ended up at Lasting Hope as they were. I didn't hear that noise when I first got to Lasting Hope, which is the hospital that saved my life 3 times. But the third time, as I was checking into the room and getting checked into the room, I didn't hear that sound, and then suddenly that noise came back, and I heard it for about an hour before they came to get me. And the machinery that they were using, the directed energy weapon that they used, raised my blood pressure to 195 over 155. And I had to be rushed by rescue squad to the emergency room, where I spent 3 days at Creighton University. They ran all of their tests on my heart to find out that my heart, even after that, was completely healthy, that there was absolutely nothing wrong with me. And I was telling them at the time, I want you to document everything I'm saying. I know how crazy it sounds, but the government is trying to kill me. And they're using directed energy weapons. And I had Creighton University send me their psychiatric department, their social work department. All of the doctors and nurses came, and they all verified what I was saying and documented what I was saying, because they couldn't understand why someone with a healthy heart would end up having the problems that I had, and then they suddenly went away and I didn't have them anymore.
I tell you what, anybody who tries to speak out about this, anybody who tries to document it and come out publicly, they can expect to have retaliation from, well, at the very least, on websites where posters will post attacks on their personalities. They don't care about the subject matter. They just want to discredit the person behind it. And if you see that, you know that's a troll trying to discredit someone. And so that is all the more evidence to believe that person if attacking them personally. Focus on the facts, the material, and know that there is hope. There's a lot of people, and together we can try to get a handle on this, identify the people, and stop it, and offer relief for the victims. So I really, really appreciate you opening up and going through all this gruesome stuff today, just because hopefully it will help people realize how prevalent this is and how nobody's alone who's gone through this. If they reach out, they can find a community of people who will support them and shield them from the merciless attacks that they're getting.
As a survivor, we have a hard enough time validating ourselves, let alone getting validation from other people. Most of all, protect yourself. Don't allow yourself to be triggered, and take care of yourself. That's the one thing about it is that people who have gone through this type of abuse, they train us to put ourselves in bad situations. And so the best thing about it is take care of yourself. The other thing that I want to say is that before we end is that all of this abuse and all of this MK Ultra stuff is coming out because a lot of it is really connected to the human trafficking issue.
We've only got seconds left, so I'm going to wrap it up right here, and thank you again, and we will continue the fight. Thank you for being a brave warrior for the truth, David.
Karen, ditto. Thank you, because you're just as brave as I am. I mean, you've done a lot in this fight, so thank you so much, Karen.
You're so welcome. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
You got a gift for me. Is it money? No. It's a poem. Can't see without my glasses. Why don't you read it for me?
No, I'd rather you read it, please.